Okay, and thank you for joining us for part 2 of an interview with series. And we're doing the second part now of an interview with Kim Stolfer, President of Firearm Owners Against Crime. And thank you for coming back in for part 2, Kim.
My pleasure, Nigel. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Very nice to have you here. Okay, so we're going to jump straight into this one. And let's talk about some of the solutions. Do you believe that putting armed guards in schools is a good idea? And what would you say regarding gun-free zones? Do you think that they are effective?
Well, right into the frying pan, right, Nigel? Okay. We've been indoctrinated to thinking that somehow the concept is if we deny guns to some people, it's effective. And that's the concept behind gun-free zones. That's the concept behind the 1996 passage of the Federal Gun-Free Schools Act. And let's be clear, that came into being because of Ohio Senator Harold Metzenbaum, and was pushed, by the way, by Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter, Republican-Democrat type of situation. But gun-free zones have been an abysmal failure. Anybody wants to challenge me on that, feel free. Fact of the matter is gun-free zones operate on the premise that if there's no guns present, we're going to make people safer. So pay real close attention to this. Schools right now across America are gun-free, gun-banned zones. Period. No guns are allowed. Hell, you can't even have a fingernail clipper half the time. So did it make schools safer? What happened after passage? See, these are questions the media never asks. Because after passage of the gun-free school zones, crimes and murders on schools jumped in the next 6 years 1,000%. So here's my logic. If government imposes a rule, a regulation, a law that increases the victimization of the very people they sought to protect, should government not be prosecuted as accessories to those crimes? Think about it. If you went out and you allowed a child access to poison under your sink, they would nail you for negligence laws. Even if it was a neighbor kid, you would get nailed to the wall and prosecuted. So why shouldn't government? Because they know. They've had experts show them that by doing this, you're going to promote more crime. Because it's called in the military, Nigel, I know you're a military guy, okay, a free fire zone. Okay? You can engage anybody anywhere without any hope of any return fire. And that's the difference between these pseudo, by the way, wannabe soldiers who have never had a bullet come whizzing over their head. Okay? Because bad guys shoot back. And in the case of criminals, in our earlier episode, we talked about self-defense and armed citizens defending themselves. The same thing happens here. The very same teachers that can go out on the street and walk down the sidewalk carrying their lawful firearm somehow are going to be murderous maniacs once they get onto school property and not exercise the same prudence as they can do in a mall, in a shopping store like Walmart. They carry guns. Pennsylvania has 1.19 million people with a license to carry concealed firearms. 1.19 million. That's 10% of American citizens. And yet somehow schools disarm the very teachers that feel they have a duty to protect those kids. And you ask about armed guards. Many schools already have armed guards, but because of the cost and the security agreements, they might have one. One security guard cannot be everywhere. Remember, Parkland had 5 armed security guards. They stayed outside. They had unarmed security guards. And the perpetrator of that crime had 44 serious run-ins with police where he violated the law. He should have never been able to get the guns. And the Parkland report showed that at every step of the way, and I want to make it clear, at every step of the way, government failed to interdict. If they had at each and every one of those 44 steps, Parkland would not have happened. Those kids would be alive. And if you think I'm kidding, I'm going to refer everybody to a John Lott book he just published. It's called Gun Myths. Get a copy of that book. You will be floored The man's daughter, Meadow, who died, wrote the foreword for it. And he talks about why what happened there was a failure of government at every level. Just like in Dunblane, when we talked in an earlier episode about England. Same thing here. Every one of these school shootings, every one of the mass murders, except for, I think it was 3% of them, were in gun-free zones where there was a total gun ban, a total prohibition. The only thing that wasn't missing is the bad guy, big idea, right? Didn't listen to the rules. So, gun-free zones are not only an aberrant failure, they are a misappropriation of the idea, and it advances an anti-gun agenda by making people think that if we deny guns to citizens, it'll make us safe. That's really at the heart of it. So, gun-free zones, as far as I'm concerned, they belong in the circular file. You know, in file 13, where everything goes, the garbage can, because it has killed more Americans than anyone wants to admit.
Okay, I'm just going to ask a few quicker questions, hopefully, as well. But do you believe there is a real demand for gun confiscation today? Because a lot of people are asleep thinking it will never happen. And that's what happened in England, as we discussed in the previous episode.
That's one of the greatest held secrets in America. It's happening right now, probably today somewhere. Whether it's New York City, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Los Angeles and California, Washington, there's laws in place already. In Chicago, they have a unit called CAGE, C-A-G-E. That's Chicago Anti-Gun Enforcement Unit. They're doing that because they have a licensing system. And if you forget and your license expires, you get a team of armed officers show up at your home, break down your door, and take your property. There's no beneficial aspect to this, no leeway given. It's at the end of 5 years, if it expires, you're a felon. New York City, the New York City gun laws are so bad, they were developed. Here's something you should know. The Sullivan Act in New York started in 1916. Okay, it was developed because of dock workers were running an extortion ring and terrorizing Italian immigrants. Well, what happened? The Italian immigrants, by the way, the dock workers were Irish. The Italian immigrants armed themselves, and they had restaurants and stores and stuff, and they have a really close-knit community. So the dock workers would come in, they started getting a bunch of holes poked in them because the Italians said, "Not today, bucko." So what did the Irish council member do? Sullivan. He passed a law saying you couldn't have a gun. You couldn't carry a gun to protect the dock workers where he was getting a cut of the proceeds. Sullivan died drunk. Okay? But that same law is in effect today. I could go across America. It's happening today. 11 states have some form of gun confiscation. Some form of it. So what we have to ask each other, is it legal? Is it right? And how many people die because of it?
Yep, we have to wake up on that. I want to move on to extreme risk protection orders. What does this mean to our viewers, and how is it being presented to the public? And what will it actually do in reality?
The public is being lied to. Extreme risk protection orders came into being years and years ago in Indiana and Connecticut. And that's the only two states that have had them for any length of time, and the outcomes of which are the only ones that are legitimate to review. Extreme risk protection orders do this. They allow anybody, like the Brown Shirts in Germany, to report on someone else that says, we think they're a danger to the community. That means no training, no background, no proof whatsoever. Emphasizing no proof. You lose your due process. They come in, they take your firearm, and they say, okay, 10 days later, maybe. By the way, it works out to about 90 days to 6 months, not 10 days in vast majority of the cases. They come in and say, okay, then you can come into court with your $5,000 attorney and defend your right as to why your rights shouldn't have been taken. Anybody see a problem with that? I mean, where? In anyone's mind's eye. So what they do is they'll say, we're doing this because it's going to stop suicides. But did it? In Connecticut, it had no net effect. In Indiana, suicides went up 44%. I testified to this in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My testimony was almost 30 pages long. Fact of the matter is, documented case, and by the way, the two of the worst anti-gunners on the Senate Judiciary Committee was Senator Farnese and Senator Santarciero. And of all the people that testified, neither one of them would challenge me. Why? Because my reputation and our reputation as an organization speaks for itself, and they run from the truth. They're better off not asking questions that they're going to look like fools on. So extremist protection orders are an effort to seize people's firearms without any due process, without any rights being protected, on the merest of accusations by someone, and then the courts get to decide. You know those tyrannical courts we talked about? The same thing. And if anyone thinks that political pressures do not impact the courts, they're living in a fantasy world.
Okay. Well, in the show, we go over many different topics and questions. So some people think that removing firearms from society will cure all of our problems. 40 or 50 years ago, we didn't seem to have the problems that we have today. What has changed?
Well, this is tied into the media. This is tied into the glorification of violence. This is tied into the average citizen realizing that there's no accountability. We talked in another episode about accountability of government. Where's the accountability to the people that commit the crimes? Let me give you a factoid. In Allegheny County, in 2001, there was a study, Operation Target, and it looked at all the crimes in Pittsburgh area, Allegheny County, and they found that all of the violent crimes, all of them, were committed by a subset of 150 criminals that the police knew. Now think about it. How could they compile that list if these were not frequent flyers, what we call them, in the justice system? Government knows who these people are. They know that the bulk of the violent crime in our society is committed 90 to 95% by violent career recidivist criminals who are having their charges plea bargained away, and they run back into society and commit more crimes. I have a friend that's a police officer who arrested the same man with 2 different guns after committing armed robberies in his same shift. How did the guy get out of jail after he arrested him the first time? And he's on a first name basis with this guy. I know one other police officer who was shot at by a perpetrator with a shotgun, and he arrested him, and now this is attempted murder of a police officer. A year later, he gets called back to the same community, and the same guy has another shotgun and shoots at him again. So I guess the best way to describe it is what my friend Detective Joe Fox, who is the man in charge of the Philadelphia Task Force for local, state, and federal authorities going after violent crime in Philadelphia. He said, until we're ready to prosecute the current laws we have on the books, there's no need for new ones.
Fair point, yep. I always like to examine all possibilities, and for me, I've got the experience of seeing that God has been removed from society in the United Kingdom and is under attack in America. Do you believe that God plays any part in this?
In the current debate, absolutely. Because what is God? God is a belief in a higher being. It's a belief in a life's long way of conducting yourself, respect for others, ethics and morals, and appropriate behavior. And if you lose that, it's anarchy. And whether or not you believe in God, everybody has to recognize that the beneficent effects of this type of an attitude. And in general, Christians, whatever religion, except maybe Islamic, because they have a violent nature to it, but whether or not that's true or not, I can't say, but other experts have. But the fact of the matter is that God in people's lives gives them a way of looking at things in a perspective that keeps us rooted in belief in our fellow man. I believe in my fellow man. I believe that they're the real solution to the problems in our society. We have to start caring. And is God necessary? Absolutely. And I have to tell you, I was really upset with Joe Biden when he just said this week that he wants to see is Islam taught in the schools, when at the same point 20 years ago, he said we can't be putting Christian values in schools and teaching prayer from the Christian perspective. If you can't do that in schools for Christianity and Christian views and Jewish views, in my opinion, you damn well shouldn't put any faith in the schools, no matter what. So buying votes at the expense of proper protocol and constitutional values is wrong. So do we need God? Yes. Why would God care if we don't?
No, I agree. Yep. And moving back again into the question between crime control and gun control. What's the difference?
It couldn't be a greater chasm between them, because crime control is when you deal with a person's or a perpetrator's actions and you hold them accountable. Gun control is where you have a blanket policy that disarms the citizens in direct defiance of the constitutions that we talked about before. When government can ignore the Second Amendment and Article 1, Section 21, then they can ignore any amendment, any right. It's just a matter of question when they want to do it. England has shown us the way with the Magna Carta, what they did to that. So crime control is when a person commits a crime, they receive an appropriate sentence. Now, I'm of the opinion that if you serve your sentence to society, that you should get your full rights back. And here's one of the problems, is we have a package of laws, an enormous wall of federal and state laws. Anybody who wants to see them, go to their state representative and look up the laws relating to guns booklet and know that that's only about 80% of all the laws relating to guns, because they don't put them all in there. So, and then you look at the federal laws. You can go up to the ATF website and you can look at the publications they have for each state. It's enormous. So we have a wall of laws that the very first thing that happens in courts, and 90% of prosecution, 97% of prosecutions occur in state courts, only 3% in the federal courts. And they cherry pick the best, most advantageous cases to their political career. Fact of the matter is that the very first thing plea bargained away in a court of law is the gun charges. One of our members, Ed Bogatz, and the other one, Jim Stoker, have both told me, and both stated this publicly, which we have a recording of, that there has been never an example, and they've got between them almost 65 years of law enforcement background. Never once have they seen the 5-year mandatory for the use of a gun in a crime imposed in Pennsylvania, in any court, for anyone. So this goes back to accountability. This goes back to our involvement. You sit in a court of law and watch it. We have to do a better job as citizens, because we have to keep an eye, because remember, a constitutional republic, we're the bosses. We're the bosses. And if we don't watch our employees, quote, our employees, then like they say, when the cat's away, the mice will play. And that happens every day. And they put monsters back on the street every day. And the anti-gun community, let me be clear. They're one of the first ones to talk about the violent crimes that are committed and say these are gun problems, when they say not one word about the failure to prosecute the criminals. That's all lip service. Because if we don't focus on the people, the implement is nothing more than an easy target for them to take and impose their agenda on.
Now, we spoke about the judicial system in the first episode, and do you believe that they're actually now creating laws instead of administering them?
In many ways, yes. In many ways, they're putting their own interpretation into what the Constitution means. In the first episode, I believe I mentioned the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court had avoided 10 cases. Now, think about this. The Heller decision, which was decided about 15 years ago, and the McDonald decision about 10 years ago, both were the first ones to indicate that the Second Amendment was an individual right. Even though the Second Amendment says the right of the citizen, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, what did it didn't say right of the government, it said right of the people. And so your question is very appropriate. And yes, many times judges have exceeded their authority. Instead of interpreting the Constitution properly, rewriting the Constitution is what they've done. And I'll tell you what some attorneys tell me. There's actually a sickness permeating our courts. And they have a term for it, the attorneys that I know. And they call it black robe disease. You put on a black robe, all of a sudden you think you're God. And that happens all too frequently. There are some excellent jurists out there, but there are other ones that, good Lord, it makes you wonder if they graduated law school, Nigel. It just makes you wonder.
What would you say to people that say nobody wants to take your guns away?
Well, as I said before, it's happening all across America. And the anti-gun groups, their agenda is the same thing. If you look on what they have on their websites, and then you look at what they say publicly, there's a vast gulf between them. Not only that, their actions, when they go out and they talk to their followers, is even worse. Because they're looking at the incremental effect. Pete Shields said back in 1976, and he was the person who put together Handgun Control Incorporated. Pete Shields was selected for that job by a CIA plant called Edward O. Wells. Edward O. Wells passed away, but he used arguably CIA money to fund and to create Handgun Control Incorporated, which is now the Brady campaign. Anybody wants to debate that with me, be my guest. Anybody watching your podcast, I'll be happy to show them the documents. Because the fact of the matter is that Handgun Control Incorporated was begun with the idea of completely eliminated handguns for personal ownership. And then he made allegations that rifles and shotguns would be next. And you know full well, Nigel, you know what England was like. Did that make England safer or more dangerous? It made it less safe, right?
Yep. Crime's out of control in the UK. They'll never report it in the media, but it's out of control.
Well, by the way, I have years ago, I got a copy of the English report on crimes. You want to know what they do? There was two reports, one by the government and then one that was created by a third-party academic group. And they found out that not only did they hide crimes, but they bulk packaged them. For instance, if there were 10 rapes in a block, that was one rape. Okay? If there were break-ins in a certain block, that was one break-in for that time period, which is 30 days. Okay? That's how they avoid reporting all the crimes. They play statistical numbers. And then, remember I talked about the monitors in the media? They control the narrative on what you get out based on how they expose the government's manipulation of facts. So yeah, I firmly believe that.
Okay. And what do you say to people that say that the Second Amendment only applies to muskets?
Oh, I'd say that they've lost something in their education process. If that's the case, then let's extend their line of thinking. Okay, if it only extends to muskets, then the First Amendment only applies to hand-operated printing presses and doesn't apply to radio and TV. And, I mean, where do you go with this line of thinking? The fact of the matter is that if you read the Anti-Federalist Papers and the Federalist Papers, which are on our website, by the way, both of them, read these papers and you'll see that the Founding Fathers meant for the citizens to be armed equally as well as the government. Remember, in the American Revolution, it was not illegal for you to own an artillery piece. Do I think we should? No, but the concept is freedom. And when I talk to politicians, the first question I ask them is, what does freedom mean to you? Think about that question. What does freedom mean to you? Is this an interpretive process? Or is this one where we have a rigid backbone, a limitation on what government is supposed to do? Because if everything is in play, then they don't understand what the concept of America is, what the shining star of our nation is for others to come here, like you did, Nigel. You came here to escape oppression, which, like it or not, is going on in England. I mean, when you have a race car driver that's arrested and put in jail for 18 months for using self-defense spray against 4 thugs, and he was a Formula One racer out with his girlfriend, he used pepper spray on 4 thugs that were armed and got 18 months in prison, ruined his career. When these are thugs that the British government, within 1 to 4 months, had released all of them. You have to question the values of our government. I mean, what are people thinking? So.
Well, yeah, I mean, pepper spray in England is a class 5 firearms offence. They just never stop. When they take away the firearms, they then move on to anything else that can protect you. And that's what's happened in the UK. You become the criminal to defend yourself.
At the root of it is a lack of trust of citizens, and they don't have the right to take that. Perhaps the English should start issuing swords and go out and take it back over and rewrite the Magna Carta for them.
Moving on then, I guess any murder that involves a firearm that fits the political agenda and blames the firearm and all firearm owners in the nation. What do you have to say on that?
I would say that Vladimir Lenin is just warming the cockles of his heart with that concept. Because this is collectivism. This is individuals willing to group people into an undesirables, if you will. I mean, you take a look at what Nazism did to Jews. They were all bad. They were all usuries. They were all people that they couldn't be trusted. And the same thing's happening to this day. In Nazi Germany, Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, that was all about disarming Jews. Why? So they couldn't fight back. So what they're doing now is they're creating the early stages of turning all people who believe in the Second Amendment into a new class of citizens who can't be trusted, who have to be demonized. And if they want to do that, I don't know if American citizens will allow for that kind of demagoguery and bitterness to grow in America. I hope it won't. They won't. I really do.
Okay. Do you have any comments regarding SSRI medications that seem to be handed out to young individuals like candy nowadays?
I have a lot of comments. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, are a mind-altering, physically altering compound that is a synthetic, and it goes in and it has enormous problems. There are, to my knowledge, there are 26 FDA, Federal Drug Administration, black box warnings, the most severe warnings on any drug. 26, maybe the most, at least it was. I don't know about now, but warnings by the FDA about don't give it to kids, don't take it with other drugs, don't handle it this way, don't exceed your medication, don't try to withdraw from it. Believe it or not, if you decide to withdraw from it, violent, suicidal episodes occur. And they started issuing this in 2008 to veterans wholesale to deal with PTSD and stuff. And the suicide rate with veterans has gone up well over 600%. This makes you as violent tendencies. These drugs impart control issues, sleep issues, your antisocial behavior. They've been involved in at least 80% of the school shootings. And here's a trick on those. When the FDA tested them and these 26 black box warnings came out, they did not test multiple compounds because there's similar compounds, but they have different effects on the human body. When they take two different drugs in that same family, they didn't test both drugs being taken, like Prozac and Anafranil at the same time, or other ones along those lines. And if they put those kind of drugs into people and they make them violent, which is clearly shown to be happening, then why don't we take and look for causation? I mean, the causal factors, when you sit and you think about it, the causal factors with these anti-gun groups is the presence of guns, right? They ignore the fact that the 3 safest states in America right now are all a constitutional carry where you don't need a license to carry a firearm. So the presence of firearms obviously isn't a problem, but they try to establish that causation. But the anti-gun groups and Michael Bloomberg, they say nothing about this. So do I believe that there is a causal factor there? Absolutely. Do I think that we're not properly handling it? Absolutely. Because if Look, if you can't find a problem, would you take your car to a mechanic and he says, well, I'm going to put a spark plug in for your flat tire. Really? And that's what we're doing. You wouldn't do that. But the American public has been deluded, has been distracted by the arguments. And we like to dumb it down as a society. You know, we look for a light switch solution. And while that may work for some things, it doesn't benefit the debate in complex issues like this. So SSRI drugs need to be handled better. Now, you asked me about solutions and other things. Here's a solution. 1, SSRI drugs should not be allowed to be prescribed by general practitioners. 2, only mental health professionals should prescribe them. 3, there must be an accountable record of the use of those drugs for each patient. We do that right now in Pennsylvania to a degree, but not for these drugs. And if you want to know why this won't get put in place, because the mental health community and big pharmaceuticals have great lobbyists. And they're holding back the legislature from doing the right thing. And the only reason that's happening is because we don't care. We're not involved. And that's a common thread with what I'm telling you.
Well, fair enough. Changing the subject a little bit here. The hip-hop and music culture that glorifies gangs, guns and killings. The movie industry, the gaming industry, which gives you points and promotions for the more people that you kill. All this desensitizes individuals to a level where it is now acceptable that a crime of violence will occur, and when it does, no one is shocked by it. I'm not saying we should censor or mandate or legislate, but do you believe these issues need to be addressed?
Absolutely. They need to be addressed because it's a causal factor. You talk to mental health professionals, they'll tell you, they'll show you videos. The glorification of violence, the desensitizing people to loss of life. I don't know a single veteran that was in combat that didn't come back changed. And yet, these same videos, by the way, were initially designed by companies that designed them for the Defense Department to make sure our military would engage the enemy. Many people don't know that in World War II, only about half of the people actually shot back against the enemy. Okay, Korea was a little bit better. Vietnam was about 72 to 75%. In the Middle East, after these videos came out, 95% or more shot back. So it's a clear factor. It's something that is known that you can turn the human mind into a killing machine. And are we doing the right thing by allowing open access to this? Well, let me change the terms. So we don't allow children to legally buy cigarettes, but they legally buy these games. But the effects on the human mind are worse than what cigarettes do to the human body. But we haven't been put in that position because the media, they rebel against any controls on the First Amendment. And that goes from the recording industry, like the hip hop, like you talked about, it goes to everything else. And yet, what's the first thing that Hollywood and the recording industry says about Second Amendment issues? With rights come responsibilities, but not for them. You know, and many times, one of the things I learned in politics is that you have to understand it's not necessarily what they're saying that's a problem. It's what they're not saying. It's the inference. It's the hidden agenda. It's what they have subconsciously behind the scenes. And that's what's part of this. You create a culture where they're fixated on digital media, where there's no controls over that media. And then you wonder why the outcome with SSRI drugs, when you combine SSRI drugs and this kind of mind conditioning, I mean, look up Lieutenant Colonel, I can't remember his name, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. Matter of fact, here, I set this out intentionally. Here's a book. Let's see.
Oh, it's not coming through on
Assassination Generation. This is a digital book. Get a copy of it. Okay, if you want to see how we're conditioning our kids to kill, get a copy of that book. And then read some of the reports by Dr. Breggin, Breggin. You can get them right on YouTube. You can see his testimony. That will shock the average person. That will shock the parent. and it should. Because the media is lying to us, not only about the right to bear arms, they're lying to us about armed citizens, and they're lying to us about the impact of their own community. And they don't want any controls on them, but they want controls and bans on all of us. And that's wrong. That's patently wrong.
Okay. Now, we often hear about the gun show loophole from the other side. And they try to get support from gun owners who sit on the fence with that. Can you explain why this is misleading to the public?
Okay. 4 years ago, I did an interview in National Public Radio in Pittsburgh. And my opposition was Shira Goodman from Ceasefire PA. And she was going all over the state talking about the gun show loophole. And as if it was some kind of boogeyman that had to be controlled. And then on the show, she admits there is none. I have a copy of the recording. So this is the executive director of Ceasefire PA saying on National Public Radio there is no gun show loophole. Why? Because what they're talking about is the private sale of firearms. The private sale of firearms, as if that is what's behind the violence in our society. But what's really going on? Is private sale of firearms a key indicator of a problem? And the fact of it is no. If you look in Pennsylvania since 1931 has not allowed the private sale of handguns. It had to go through law enforcement. To this day, you cannot buy a handgun in Pennsylvania. By the way, you can't buy it through the mail or the internet either. There's another big lie. Okay? But there's no private sale of handguns in Pennsylvania. So has that stopped the use of handguns in Pennsylvania? When nearly 70% of the handguns used in violent crime in Pennsylvania comes from domestic sales. It hasn't. So let me expose a little lie. There's a thing on the ATF called the TRAC report, TRAC. And you go up and you look at that from Syracuse University. And what you'll find is that the TRAC report says that what is the average time to crime that the average person would think? You know, they intimate that we need waiting periods. They intimate that somehow that's going to protect life or somehow make us safer. The average time for waiting period, or for this, from a firearm when it's first bought to go into crime, is 10.98 years. Not days, not weeks, not months, years, almost 11 years. And we're going to pass laws when it's that big of a gap? Here's a big lie, okay? And this goes to the gun show loophole thing, because somehow that's supposed to be the conduit. What don't we do when people try to buy guns? We plea bargain the charges away. What happens when they steal firearms? That's one of those charges that's dropped. It's a felony 3 in Pennsylvania. Why is that charge dropped? Why do we not prosecute identity theft? With identity theft, if you're a clean identity, the system is blind to you. No matter what you do, you get the gun. So if they're a prohibited person, but you know, that goes to another point too. If you're a prohibited person, but you can't own a gun, why are you out on the street? If you're so dangerous that you can't legitimately get all your rights back, isn't government saying that they can't trust you because you might commit more crimes? And if that's the case, why are they taking our rights and not taking the rights away from somebody they know is a violent conduit to the problem? So it's all wrapped up in the fact that they create these ideas. And I call them toilet shows, toilet stall concepts. Okay? Why? Because I think they write that sometimes when they're in the midst of some business in the toilet on toilet paper, because that's what it is. It's junk. Okay? It's not an idea that's going to work. It's just something that they can manipulate the public, because that's what this is. This is a giant game show. This is a giant charade. This is like Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus. There's nothing real about it.
All right, I want to move on. We've almost out of time, so I've got a few questions left I want to bring in. I want to bring up the term ghost guns. Can you explain what that means?
Ghost guns is part of a concept where a person can make their own guns under federal law. Remember, federal law under the 68 Gun Control Act has primacy. It's legal for you to make your own gun. It's also a requirement that if you do that, you cannot resell that gun to anyone. You can't pass it down in your will. The gun has to be destroyed. And if you look at the M1 carbine, the M1 carbine for the troops in World War II was designed by a private individual. He did that, and he was a criminal. He was a felon. He designed it in jail. So ingenuity and uniqueness of thought is wrapped around this concept. So ghost guns. Ghost guns is where you have a plastic or an aluminum block that's called an 80% receiver, where supposedly you can change that into a functioning firearm by buying all of the other parts. The only regulated part in a firearm is the receiver. And I'm not going to get into whether or not federal law mandate of a receiver isn't even accurate, and ATF agents are testifying in court against federal law because of the way it was written, but that's another story. Fact of the matter is, you have a block of metal or plastic that can be turned with some machine skills into a functioning firearm and attach all of the other parts, barrel, the trigger, the stock, that sort of thing. So ghost gun is one that doesn't have a serial number on it, basically. Is a serial number necessary? No, because they don't use that to track criminals. How do they know a crime is committed with a gun? When they've got a bullet hole in the bad guy, and they've got a casing on the ground probably, but that doesn't mean that the law did anything to stop the crime, did it? I mean, think about it. Registering gun owners. How is it going to work? It doesn't work. We sued the state. From 1901 until 2001, the state had been recording all sales of all firearms. And it was only used in the whole time 4 times. Major Hackenberg testified to this 4 times in that whole period of time in a prosecution. And it wasn't the essential element of solving it. People have been lied. We spent millions of dollars. Every gun that is imported or manufactured in America costs 50 cents, and this was back about 10 years ago, costs 58 cents per gun per year to keep on the records. And they keep records. So ghost guns are part of a larger concept to make people think, and another lie, that people are going out and building these guns and committing crimes. The last time I looked, across America, there was 58 crimes committed with these guns, and every single one of them was committed by a person who shouldn't have had the guns in the first place.
I want to lead into now Ceasefire PA. They're pushing for regulation by the ATF. And does the ATF have the power to create its own legislation and regulations? Well, not legislation. Create its own regulations.
Legitimately speaking, I'm sure you're talking about ghost guns and regulating them that way. No, they can't do anything without an order from Congress. But at the same time, if you look at bump stocks, they created regulations that have endangered every semi-automatic firearm because of the way they twisted the definition. And that was to comply with President Trump and what he had directed them to do. So can they create regulations? No. They have to wait for Congress. But considering this dysfunctional Congress, I wouldn't want to be holding my breath.
Okay, I'm going to finish with 2 more questions. And I think it's fair to say that most elected Republican politicians support the Second Amendment, where most Democrats seem to be in favour of gun control. For example, limited number of rounds in a magazine. In Pennsylvania, there was a bill trying to push $10 fee for each firearm you own each year. What would you say to Democrat voters out there that still believe that the Democrat representatives support the Second Amendment?
Well, in large part, I'm going to start with this. When I first got into this, Pennsylvania had substantially twice as many pro-gun A-rated Democrats as we did Republicans. However, that has changed. That's shifted into a different direction. We're lucky that those were called blue dog Democrats. Now, as far as what would you say to Democrats that say they support the Second Amendment? I think it's one of those Missouri statements. You have to say, show me. What's your voting record? Now, if you want to look at our website, every legislator up there has his voting record up there. It's graded and it's shown you, and you can go look at the votes because you have a right to do that. That's why we created the website the way it is. Do some of them support the Second Amendment? Absolutely. But the word equivocation comes to mind. Because when you say support, that's a very broad term. It's like a parachute covering a lot of ground. Okay? So when they say that, you have to find out how they define those terms. And that's what one of our roles is. We want to interact with them and then show them why they should maybe revisit some issues. Because remember, politics is maybe the art of compromise, but it's also the art of education. And the best thing you can do as a citizen is to work with a politician and educate them. When I got involved with this, my state rep, Huck Gamble, who was in Oakdale, he stood on the steps of his district office and said, we have to ban these things, and held an AR-15 over his head. 2 years later, he was looking at the Democrat caucus from Philadelphia, and he said to him, you've lied to me, and I'll never support gun control again. Why? Predominantly because I sat down with him, and what did I see when I walked into his office the first time? Now, understand, I'm a Marine. I hated politicians. They sent me to Vietnam. Okay? When I walked in, on the wall was hanging his DD-214, which is the military when you retire from the military. And it said United States Marine Corps on it. And I said, Huck, a fellow Marine to Marine, you're going to sit down and you're going to listen to me because I'm not only a constituent, I'm a fellow Marine. And he did. And at the end, he was more pro-gun than maybe only one or two state Republicans. You can make the changes if you want to. And so it's up to us to make these changes.
Okay. And we'll be placing links to your website as well on the production when it goes out. So there'll be contact information there as well.
Thank you.
I think the final question for today is, what do you see as the biggest threat to the Second Amendment?
The biggest threat to the Second Amendment is apathy among Americans. We have 5 million gun owners, according to the National Shooting Sports Foundation survey of Pennsylvania. 5 million gun owners. The apathy among gun owners is telling. If we would all vote, now keep in mind that only about 2.5 million votes, possibly 3 million, are going to be cast in the presidential election. And if you don't see that as an important commodity, just understand the differences between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Fact of the matter is, the biggest danger to our rights, the biggest danger is apathy. The second biggest danger is our lack of knowledge and understanding. But I believe everybody has a right to know and to have the opportunity to learn. And I don't like the national groups for how they don't teach people about what it means. I mean, half the times they send an alert out and don't even tell you the bill number that's involved. And when they do tell you the bill number, they don't even direct it. Sometimes they don't even provide a link. So I think dumbing down of gun owners and this attitude of you can pay us $30 and that's all you have to do has led us down a dangerous path. And then we can't fix these problems unless we get involved.
No, I agree. And once you lose those rights, you'll never get them back.
Not without a lot of bloodshed.
You'll never know when you'll need those rights, or the next generation, your children's children, may need those in the future.
Yes.
So if you get rid of those during this generation, your future family may need those rights in the future.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in again today, Kim, online. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you do a lot of great work in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure across the nation people look at the website and see what's going on. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome, and speak to you soon. Have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.